Wyoming Territory, 1883. The wind howled low across the plains as Fletcher Lane dropped the latch on her front door and raised her rifle without thinking. It was near midnight, and no one decent came calling at this hour at least, not to a widow living alone with 2 children. She stepped onto the porch, quiet as snowfall, and found a man standing at the gate. He did not move. Hat low, hands away from his belt, he stood like he had every right to be there and no intention of causing harm. Fletcher's voice was cold. "You are either lost or foolish." "I am neither," he said. His voice was quiet, deep. "Name's Declan Tate. I heard you were hiring for fence repair." She lowered the rifle a fraction. "That was 6 days ago." "I was not 6 days away from here," he replied. "But I came." She hesitated. The moonlight caught the edge of his jaw, the broad curve of his shoulders. He looked like he belonged to the land, sun-cut skin, dust on his boots, a man shaped by open sky. "I do not hire men who show up after dark," she said. "That is fair," he answered and nodded once. "I will wait." Fletcher stared at him. "Wait for what?"
"For morning," he said.
"If you change your mind." She thought he was bluffing. But when she shut the door, he only stepped onto the edge of her porch and sank down against the rail. He folded his coat around himself, leaned his back against the post like he had done it 1,000 times before. Then he went still. She locked the door behind her, heart tight in her chest. Her daughter, Elsie, shuffled into the room, rubbing her eyes. Was someone there? Fletcher crouched and brushed the girl's hair back. "Just a cowboy looking for work." "Is he going to stay?" Fletcher's throat closed. No, the next morning, the sun came up slow and gold over the wheatgrass. When Fletcher stepped out with a bucket for the well, Declan was still there. He stood when he saw her. His coat was frosted at the edges, his jaw unshaven, but his eyes were steady. "You stayed," she said. "I said I would. I still do not need help." He nodded. "All right." He turned to go, boots crunching the frost, but Fletcher surprised herself. "Wait." He stopped. "You can fix the south fence. If you finish by dusk, I will pay you $1.50. Declan tipped his hat. "That will do." Fletcher watched him walk off, shoulders squared, and wondered what kind of man waded through the cold just to prove he would. By noon, the fence was half mended. Fletcher watched from the garden as he worked, hands sure, movements quiet. He never looked toward the house. Elsie brought him water just after midday. Fletcher saw the way her daughter studied him, curious but wary. "You do not talk much," the girl said. Declan smiled and took the cup. "I talk when I have something worth saying." Elsie considered that. "Mama does not like cowboys." "That's so?" he asked. "She says they leave." Declan looked toward the house, toward the window where Fletcher stood.
"Some do," he said.
"Not all." Fletcher felt something shift in her chest, like the first crack in ice before it breaks. That night, she left the $1.50 in an envelope on the fence post. She expected him to take it and go. But the next morning when she opened the door, he was there again, sitting on the porch rail like he belonged to it. She blinked. "Why are you here?" "You got more fence," he said. "I can stay until it is done." "I never said." "You did not have to." Fletcher stared at him. "I do not need anyone." "I believe you." "Then why are you here?" He looked up at her, and this time his voice was quiet enough to reach something deep inside her. "Because I do not think you should have to do everything alone." She made herself look away. "Suit yourself." He worked through the day. That night, Fletcher left no money. Still, he returned. By the 4th day, he was sleeping in the barn with the old mule and eating biscuits off her porch steps. Elsie had taken to sitting near him, asking questions. He always answered honestly and never pushed. Even Everett, her 6-year-old, who had not spoken much since their father left, had started bringing him nails and tools. Fletcher watched all of it with growing unease. She had built this life with her bare hands. She had buried her husband 5 years ago and raised 2 children without asking for help. She could not afford to trust a man who might vanish the moment she let her guard down. So on the 6th day, she stood on the porch and crossed her arms. "You need to go." Declan looked up from the saddle he was repairing. "Did I do something wrong?" "No," she said. "But I do not want you here anymore." He studied her for a long moment, then stood. "I understand," he said. He picked up his coat and tipped his hat to Elsie, who looked like she might cry. He walked to the edge of the yard, then stopped. Fletcher watched him. He turned, met her gaze across the distance. "I will wait until morning," he said. "I told you to go," she snapped. "I know." Then he sat back down on the edge of her porch, just like the first night. Fletcher shut the door hard. She paced the floor, heart pounding, furious at herself for letting him stay this long, for letting her children get attached, for letting herself feel anything at all. But when she looked out the window an hour later, he was still there. He stayed through the night. When she opened the door at dawn, he stood. His eyes were rimmed with red, his coat damp from the cold. She stared at him. "Why would you do that?" "Because you matter," he said simply. Tears stung her eyes. "I told you to leave." "I know." She walked down the steps. Her hands shook. "You are a fool," she said. "Maybe," he said. "But I meant it." She stared at him for a long time. Then, without speaking, she reached for his hand. He did not hesitate. His fingers wrapped around hers, warm and solid. Fletcher's voice was barely a whisper. "Do not leave." "I will not," Declan said. And he never did. By the end of March, the snow had shrunk back to the gullies and tree shadows, and the earth began to breathe again. Fletcher stood in the barn doorway, watching Declan fork hay into the stalls. The coat he'd worn since arriving hung from a nail, patch mended at the elbow. He moved with a kind of quiet steadiness, like he'd always known how to work beside others without asking for praise or offering excuse. The mule had taken a liking to him, nuzzling his arm for grain. Declan scratched its ear absently. "I never asked where you came from," Fletcher said. He didn't look up. "Wasn't sure you'd want to know." "I wouldn't have asked if I didn't." She stepped further inside, arms crossed against the chill. He leaned the pitchfork against the wall. "Born in Missouri. Left when I was 16. Worked cattle in the Panhandle, then broke horses near Abilene. Been drifting since." "What sent you here?" He paused. Drift started feeling more like running. She studied him, the way his eyes stayed on the mule's neck. "From what?" Declan shrugged. "A man don't have to do something wrong to still want to start over." Fletcher nodded slowly. "You're not the only one." He turned at that, met her gaze without flinching. "I figured." Wind stirred the dust between them. Somewhere outside, Everett was dragging a stick through the dry creek. Elsie's voice echoed faintly, reading aloud from the primer Fletcher had taught her from. Declan spoke low. "You said I shouldn't stay." "I did. But I'm still here." "I know." He waited. She didn't fill the silence. "I can start building that hen coop you mentioned," he said at last. "If you've still a mind for it." Fletcher tilted her head. "You remembered." "I remember everything you say." She walked past him, trailing her hand along the stall post. "The ground near the oak's soft enough now. Start there." That evening, the smell of cedar smoke curled from the chimney, and the air held a whisper of spring. Elsie fell asleep in front of the hearth, book open on her chest, while Everett lay curled on the rug with the pup they'd found half-starved behind the granary. Fletcher folded laundry at the table, the light low and golden behind her. "You never said what happened to your husband," Declan said quietly. She folded a shirt with shaking hands. "He left." Declan waited, saying nothing. "Not in the ground, not to war." Just walked out 3 winters ago with a saddlebag and never came back. Declan's jaw tightened. And the law? There's no law for a man who vanishes quiet. He didn't drink or beat me. Just stop trying. I buried the marriage, same as if I'd buried him. He didn't offer comfort. Just nodded once, respectful. Fletcher looked up. You planning to vanish quiet too? No, he said. I plan to stay loud enough you'd hear me gone. She didn't smile, but her eyes softened. The next morning, Declan was already trimming boards for the coop when she came out with coffee. He'd rolled his sleeves, sawdust clinging to the hair of his forearms. She held out the tin cup. You earned this today. He took it with a quiet thank you. She noticed his hands scarred at the knuckles, one finger crooked slightly at the joint. You break it roping? He looked at the finger. Bar fight. Wasn't worth it. Most fights aren't. He sipped the coffee, then murmured, some things are. She didn't ask what. She didn't need to. That afternoon, Elsie stood on a stump, watching Declan lay chicken wire. You gonna marry Mama? He didn't startle. That ain't up to me. She frowned. Mama don't smile easy. But I seen her look at you when you're not looking. That means something. Declan set the hammer down and knelt. You want her mama to marry someone? Elsie's brow furrowed in thought. Only if he stays. He met her eyes. I don't know how to be much, but I know how to stay. That night, Fletcher sat on the porch steps, knitting in her lap forgotten. Declan joined her, lowering himself beside her without a word. The stars were just coming out one by one. I used to think nobody would ever come back once they left, she said. I didn't leave. She turned to him. But I told you to. I heard you. I just didn't believe you meant it. She looked away, blinking once. It scared me. The way you stayed. I know. They sat in silence for a long time. Then, softly, she said, you could have gone. That first night. Or the second. I didn't want to. Why not? He looked at her then, as if trying to find the right words. Because something in you looked like the place I'd been riding toward for years.
She didn't speak.
But after a long beat, she reached over and took his hand. It was already warm, like he'd been waiting for hers to find it. Rain had come in the night, gentle and steady, and by morning the ground around the oak tree was soft enough to cling to the soles of their boots. Declan stood with a hand on his hip, surveying the coop's frame. Fletcher leaned against a post, sleeves rolled and apron still damp from scrubbing the churn. You built it square, she said. Learn the hard way that chickens don't like to sleep sideways. She raised an eyebrow. You been around chickens before? Couple winters outside Wichita. Worked for a widow with more hens than sense. She paid in eggs and scolding. Fletcher dusted her hands. Sauce familiar. Declan glanced over, not smiling exactly, but something passed between them fleeting, like wind through tall grass. Later, Fletcher found Everett sitting beside Declan's saddle, small fingers tracing the worn leather tooling. She crouched beside him, brushing straw from his shirt. You like the carving? Declan asked. Everett nodded, then pointed to a faded mark near the cantle. That one's from a mesquite thorn, Declan said. Caught it riding fence outside San Angelo. Took me a week to pick the splinters out. Everett leaned closer, wide-eyed. Fletcher didn't interrupt. Declan looked at her. He's quiet, but he listens close. He always has. Declan nodded once, and didn't press further. That evening, Fletcher stood by the stove, folding dough for a meat pie. Declan entered without ceremony, boots clean, hair still damp from washing at the pump. He paused when he saw the flour on her hands. You need help? You ever made pastry? No. Then sit down before you ruin it. He did, easing into the chair nearest the fire. The warmth stretched between them, quiet, unhurried. Elsie and Everett were outside by the woodpile, arranging stones in a circle. Fletcher didn't ask what for. They needed space like anyone else. Declan watched her work, eyes steady. You ever think about leaving Wyoming? She didn't look up. Once, maybe. Before the children were born. What stopped you? She pinched the dough shut. The land held me. He nodded. I understand that. She glanced at him then. You. I went as far as Cheyenne once. Thought I might keep going. But the town started looking the same. Nothing worth staying for. Fletcher slid the pie into the oven. And now? He looked at her, not blinking. Now I've got something. She didn't answer. Just turned away, heart stirring with something sharp and unfamiliar. After the meal, Fletcher stepped outside alone, arms wrapped around herself as the sky deepened. The fields stretched out in gold and shadow. The wind carried the smell of damp earth and pine. Declan joined her, but kept his distance. You came here without knowing what you'd find, she said. I wasn't looking for anything. She turned to him. Then why did you stop here? Because your name came from someone I trusted. And when I saw you, I knew I wouldn't want to leave. She let the silence settle. I'm not easy, she said. I didn't ask for easy. I won't marry a man out of loneliness. He took a step closer. Then don't. Marry one because you want to build something stronger than what's behind you. Her breath caught. I don't trust easy, she said. I'll earn it every day. The light faded from the sky, and the stars began to gather. Fletcher didn't speak, but she reached out, and her fingers found his. He took her hand, slow and careful, like something sacred. She didn't let go. By late April, the frost had loosed its grip for good. The creek behind the barn ran clear again, and the cottonwoods along its banks had begun to leaf out in pale, fluttering green. Fletcher stood at the clothesline, pinning up Everett's shirts, when she caught sight of Declan walking back from the north pasture with a coil of wire slung over his shoulder. His gait was easy, but his eyes were turned inward. She recognized the weight of a man thinking about something that wouldn't let go. She didn't call to him. Instead, she watched him from behind the sheets until he stopped by the porch and set the wire down beside the steps. Then, as if feeling her gaze, he looked toward her, and their eyes met through the linen. That evening, after the children had gone to bed and the oil lamp burned low in the kitchen, she found him out by the fence, seated on the top rail, with his coat folded at his side. The moon hung full above the trees, silvering the grass and the rim of his jaw. She stepped up beside him, arms folded. You've been quiet. He didn't look at her right away. Got a letter yesterday. From Kansas. Fletcher's stomach tightened. Bad news.
No, he said.
Not exactly. He reached into his pocket and handed her a folded scrap of paper, edges worn soft with handling. She hesitated, then opened it. A woman's handwriting, neat and slanted, filled the page. She was my sister-in-law, he said, before the war. Fletcher read the first lines, enough to understand. You were married. I was. She folded the letter carefully. You never said. I didn't think it mattered until now. She waited. We married young. She died in childbirth, spring of '65. Her sister wrote me once a year after that, just to say the boy was growing. He rubbed a hand over his face. I never met him. He turned 18 last month. Wants to come west. Fletcher looked down at the letter, then back at him. You told him where to find you? I wrote back. Told him there's work here, if he wants it. But I won't send for him unless you say it's welcome. She handed him the letter. You're part of this place now. If he's yours, he's welcome. Declan looked at her then, something raw and grateful flickering behind his eyes. I didn't expect you to say that. You didn't expect to stay either, she said. And yet here you are. He slid down from the rail and stood beside her. You've given me more than I ever asked for.
You didn't ask, she said.
That's how I knew you meant it. They stood together in the moonlight, the wind stirring the grass at their feet. You think he'll come? She asked.
I don't know, he said.
But if he does, I'd like him to see what it looks like to stay true. Fletcher opened the gate and walked a few steps out into the pasture. She turned back, her face unreadable in the silver light. Then show him. The next morning, Fletcher found Everett kneeling beside the hearth, carving a small wooden horse with a dull knife. She crouched beside him, brushing the shavings from his shirt. Where'd you learn that? She asked. He didn't speak, just looked toward the barn where Declan was sawing cedar planks. She touched his shoulder. You want to give it to him? He nodded. When Declan came in for water, Everett stood near the door, holding out the carving with both hands. Declan took it gently, turned it over once, then knelt. Did you make this? Everett nodded again. Declan didn't speak right away. Then he looked up at Fletcher. May I keep it? She nodded. He stood, cradling the little figure in his palm. I've had a lot of things taken from me, he said. Not many given. Everett leaned against his side, and Declan rested a hand on the boy's back. Later, Fletcher sat with Elsie at the table, helping her mend a ripped hem. The girl glanced up, needle paused. Will he live with us for good? Fletcher threaded the needle again. That's up to him. Elsie frowned. But if he goes, it'll hurt. Fletcher looked at her daughter, then toward the door where Declan leaned against the post, watching the road.
He's not going, she said.
Not unless we ask him to. That night, as they folded into the quiet of the porch, Fletcher stood beside Declan beneath the stars. You ever think, she said, about building a house from the ground up? Not just fixing what's left behind. He glanced at her. I'd like to. She looked out over the pasture. Then we'll do it. Together. Declan reached for her hand, not as a question, but as something already decided. She gave it to him, steady and sure. Neither of them looked away. By early May, wild plum blossoms had opened along the edge of the pasture, and Fletcher had taken to keeping the windows open through the warmest part of the day. The scent of tilled earth drifted in on the breeze, and the hens scratched contentedly in their new coop beneath the oak. Declan came in from the field near sundown, shirt damp at the collar, and a notch of dirt along his jaw. He set the shovel by the door and leaned down to unbuckle his boots. Fletcher passed him a basin and a rag before he asked. You didn't have to, he said. You were tracking it through the floorboards. I did. He half laughed, low and brief. I was thinking we might try corn in the north plot. The soil's dry, but the light's good. Worth a try. She dried her hands on the hem of her apron. If we do, we'll need to dig deeper rows. The water won't hold otherwise. I'll set the lines tomorrow. She nodded, then paused. Are you still waiting for a letter? He looked up. I stopped expecting one. Some boys don't want to know their father, not after 18 years. Fletcher pulled a stool beside him. Maybe. Or maybe he's figuring out what kind of man he'd be walking toward. Declan ran the rag over his neck. I'm not sure I know how to be one. Not properly. You've been teaching Everett to cut kindling straight. You showed Elsie how to mend her boot sole with a nail and a scrap of leather. That's more than most manage. He set the basin aside. You ever think about what comes next? Not the chores or the planting. Just after. She tilted her head. You mean a life where the days don't feel borrowed? He nodded once. I used to think I wasn't allowed to want more than what I could build with my own two hands, she said. But I've been wrong before. They sat in the quiet, the last light stretching long across the floorboards. I want to marry you, Fletcher, he said at last. Not to fix anything. Just because this what we've made, here it feels like home. She didn't speak right away, didn't look away either. Then ask proper, she said. Declan stood, brushed his palms on his trousers, and knelt beside her. Will you marry me? Fletcher reached out, rested her fingers against his cheek, and smiled in a way she hadn't since before the war took the first half of her youth.
Yes.
I will. They wed beneath the oak tree 2 weeks later, with the children standing close and the hens clucking in the background like old women blessing the union. Elsie wore a crown of wildflowers she'd woven herself, and Everett held a small wooden cross he'd carved from cedar. There was no preacher, no paper, but the vows were spoken clear and the promises made in full view of the sky. Afterward, they shared bread and dried apples, and Declan lifted Fletcher's hand to his lips as the sun sank behind the ridge. That night, he carried her across the threshold not as a gesture, but because she laughed when he tried and didn't tell him not to. They lay in bed with the windows open, the sounds of the prairie washing soft against the walls. "You still afraid I'll leave?" he asked. She traced the scar at his temple with her thumb.
"No.
"I'm afraid you'll see how much I need you." He turned to kiss her palm. "Then we're even." The land grew greener as the season turned. The corn took root in the north plot, stubborn and strong. Declan added a second stall to the barn, and Fletcher began teaching Elsie to keep the ledger for the dry goods. Everett started whittling animals from scraps and left them in the window sills as quiet gifts. One morning, a young man arrived on horseback, dusty and uncertain. He wore his hat low and his coat too tight across the shoulders, and when he dismounted, he stood with his hands clenched at his sides. Declan stepped forward, slow and careful. "You came." The boy nodded. "Took me a while to get here." Declan didn't reach for him, just said, "You hungry?" The boy's chin trembled once. "A little." Fletcher stepped onto the porch. "We've still got bread." The boy looked between them, eyes guarded. "I don't have money." "We're not charging," Fletcher said. "Come inside." He did. They gave him a cot in the loft and work in the fields. His name was Colin, and he spoke little at first, but he watched Declan closely and listened when Fletcher taught him how to patch the roofline before the rains came. By midsummer, he was laughing with Everett by the creek and bringing in his share without needing to be asked. One night, Fletcher stood at the edge of the porch while the children played in the grass and Colin strung a line for the wash. Declan came up behind her, arms loose around her waist. "You said once you never thought you'd want more than what you could build with your hands," he murmured. "I remember. Look what we've built." She leaned back into him. "It's more than I ever thought I'd have." "Me too." The moon rose slow over the ridge, and the wind carried the scent of lavender from the edge of the garden. They stood together, quiet and full, and nothing ever pulled them apart.